What if the child who holds the future of the royal lineage isn't actually a royal at all? In a shocking twist that's sending shockwaves across both sides of the Atlantic, Matt Lauer has publicly claimed to be the real father of Archie Harrison, and he's demanding a DNA test to prove it. The allegations have sparked a royal crisis like no other, with whispers of secret meetings and hidden truths swirling through the media. Insiders suggest Meghan is in full-blown panic, terrified of what the test might reveal, while Prince Harry is left reeling in disbelief. But what evidence does Lauer have? And could this scandal unravel everything Meghan and Harry have built? Today, we'll peel back the layers of this explosive revelation, exposing the secrets, the betrayals, and the battle for the truth that could shake the monarchy to its core. Stay with us, because this story is just getting started. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. The early morning sun spilled across the lush, manicured lawns of Montecito, casting a warm glow over the sprawling estate that Prince Harry and Meghan Markle now called home. It was a scene of tranquility, an idyllic paradise far removed from the pressures of palace life. Birds flitted from branch to branch, their songs light and cheerful, while the Pacific breeze rolled gently through the palm trees, whispering of endless possibilities. But within the walls of the grand mansion, tension simmered beneath the surface, thick and unyielding. Harry had risen early, his mind restless and plagued by the whispers that had crept through the corridors of Hollywood like wildfire. It had begun as little more than a murmur, an unsubstantiated rumor passed from one well-connected socialite to another, weaving its way through the upper echelons of California's elite. But soon, the whispers grew louder, their volume swelling with each new iteration until the name Matt Lauer surfaced, unyielding and relentless. At first, Harry had brushed it off, convinced that it was yet another attempt by the media to stir controversy and destabilize his family. But then the whispers took root, planting seeds of doubt that grew and festered with every passing day. Meghan had remained poised and composed, her smile unwavering in the face of the swirling rumors. She dismissed the allegations as mere gossip, the product of tabloid sensationalism and jealousy. But Harry couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to it. He had heard Lauer's name whispered with increasing frequency, always linked to the same accusation, that Archie Harrison, his son, might not be his biological child. And then came the bombshell. Matt Lauer himself reportedly demanding a DNA test, claiming that he, not Harry, was Archie's real father. The accusation had hit Harry like a sledgehammer, shattering the fragile sense of stability he had clung to since leaving the United Kingdom. He had sacrificed everything for Meghan, his title, his role within the royal family, the only life he had ever known. And now, his faith was being tested in the most unimaginable way. The idea that another man, especially someone as controversial as Matt Lauer, could be connected to Archie's birth was unthinkable. And yet, the whispers persisted, growing louder, more insistent with each passing day. Determined to confront the situation head-on, Harry arranged a meeting with Meghan in the sunlit study of their estate. The room was pristine, decorated in soft creams and elegant furnishings that spoke of wealth and sophistication. Floor-to-ceiling windows allowed sunlight to flood the space, casting long shadows across the hardwood floors. Meghan sat poised and graceful, her posture immaculate as she sipped delicately from a porcelain teacup. Her expression was calm, unbothered, as if the rumors were nothing more than a mild inconvenience. Harry watched her for a moment, his hands clasped tightly together, his knuckles white from the pressure. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and steady. "Meghan, I need to ask you something. And I need you to be completely honest with me." Meghan's eyes flickered briefly, a shadow of concern flitting across her features before she composed herself. She set her teacup down gently, folding her hands in her lap. "Of course, Harry," she replied smoothly. "You can ask me anything." Harry hesitated, his gaze dropping to his hands before meeting hers once more. "There are rumors about Matt Lauer. About Archie." Meghan's expression did not falter, though her eyes narrowed slightly. "What kind of rumors?" she asked, her voice still steady, but now edged with something sharper. Harry took a deep breath, steeling himself. "That he's claiming to be Archie's father. That he's demanding a DNA test." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. Meghan's gaze did not waver, her expression unreadable. Finally, she spoke, her voice calm but firm. "That's ridiculous, Harry. Absolute nonsense. Harry searched her eyes, looking for cracks, for any sign of deception, but Meghan's composure remained intact. "It's just another attempt to smear us," she continued, her voice gaining strength. "We've seen this before. Lies and rumors designed to tear us apart." Harry nodded slowly, his mind still churning. He wanted to believe her, desperately, almost painfully, but the whispers refused to fade. They lingered in the back of his mind, whispering of secrets and lies, of betrayal hidden beneath layers of polished smiles and carefully crafted appearances. Why would he say it, though? Harry pressed, his voice softer now, almost pleading. Why would he make a claim like that if there was no truth to it? Meghan's eyes flashed with something dark and fleeting. Because he wants attention. He wants to drag us into the mud for his own gain. He's been out of the spotlight for years, and now he's using us to make himself relevant again. Her words were sharp, her tone decisive, but Harry could not shake the feeling that something was amiss. He watched her carefully, his mind flickering back to the early days of their relationship, the secrets that had been kept from him, the lies that had only come to light after they were too deeply intertwined to turn back. But Meghan's confidence was unwavering, her composure flawless. She rose from her chair, smoothing her hands down the front of her dress as she approached him. "Harry, you have to trust me," she whispered, placing her hands on his shoulders, her eyes searching his. "These are just rumors. Nothing more." Harry nodded again, his heart aching with the desire to believe her. He pulled her into an embrace, his arms wrapping around her tightly, as if holding her would keep the truth at bay. Meghan rested her head against his chest, her eyes slipping closed as she breathed him in, her expression softening. But behind her calm exterior, tension simmered. Meghan had always been a master of public perception, her ability to navigate the media both a gift and a necessity. She knew how to control a narrative, how to project confidence even when the ground beneath her was shaking. But Matt Lauer's claims were not something she had anticipated. His insistence on a DNA test, his public statements, were dangerous, not just for her reputation, but for her marriage. Harry's trust was her strongest asset, the pillar on which she had built her life in California. If that trust began to crack, if Harry began to question her loyalty, her honesty, then everything she had built would be at risk. Outside, the sun continued its steady ascent, casting light and shadows across the gardens that stretched out before the estate. To the outside world, it was a picture of tranquility and elegance, a royal fairy tale reimagined on American soil. But behind the walls of the grand mansion, secrets festered, threatening to unravel the carefully constructed narrative that Harry and Meghan had fought so hard to protect. And as Harry held her in his arms, his eyes fixed on the horizon beyond the windows, he couldn't shake the whisper of doubt that lingered in the back of his mind. Was it possible? Could there be truth to Matt Lauer's claim? The idea was unthinkable, a betrayal too deep to comprehend. But the rumors persisted, growing louder with each passing day, and Harry knew that he could not ignore them forever. The news broke like a thunderclap, rippling through the media with a force that shattered the usual cadence of royal gossip. Matt Lauer, once a respected television anchor and now a name mired in controversy, had resurfaced with a declaration that stunned both Hollywood and royal circles alike. His claim was bold, brash, and unprecedented. He was demanding a DNA test to prove that he was the biological father of Archie Harrison, the son of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. The allegations were first aired during a private conversation that was supposedly leaked to the press. Lauer, speaking with a close confidant, allegedly revealed that he and Meghan had been involved in a secret affair during the time leading up to her engagement with Prince Harry. According to Lauer, their relationship was more than just fleeting. It was intense, hidden from the public eye, and known to only a select few. He went on to claim that Archie, now at the center of a global media firestorm, was his biological son, not Harry's. The initial reports were met with disbelief. How could such a story hold any weight? Matt Lauer, once a staple of American morning television, had been disgraced after a series of misconduct allegations led to his public downfall. His reemergence with this bombshell claim seemed almost too sensational to be true. But the whispers persisted, growing louder with each passing day as more sources came forward to corroborate Lauer's story. Some spoke of secret meetings between him and Meghan, hushed phone calls that stretched late into the night, and mysterious trips that had been brushed off as business obligations. Lauer's demand for a DNA test only heightened the tension. His public insistence that Meghan was hiding the truth sent shockwaves through the royal family. forcing them to confront yet another scandal that threatened to unravel the very fabric of their public image. Meghan, when questioned, dismissed the claims as nothing more than an attempt to slander her name. But behind closed doors, palace aides scrambled to contain the damage. Rumors began to swirl about meetings between the Queen's senior advisors and legal representatives, strategizing on how best to address the situation without feeding into Lauer's narrative. The demand for a DNA test was more than just a tabloid headline, it was a legal challenge. In California, the request for paternity testing could be pursued if sufficient evidence of a relationship was presented. Lauer, seemingly well prepared for the inevitable pushback, reportedly began compiling documentation to support his claims. His legal team spoke confidently about their chances, hinting that if the test were refused, it would serve as an admission of guilt. Meghan's representatives quickly fired back, calling the allegations baseless and ludicrous, but the damage had already been done. The world was watching, and questions of Archie's paternity began to circulate with renewed intensity. It wasn't long before the story broke across international lines, with British tabloids seizing the scandal with the kind of fervor that only a royal crisis could inspire. Headlines screamed from the front pages of nearly every major publication: Matt Lauer demands DNA test, Archie's true father, and royal scandal. Is Harry really the father? The implications were staggering. Not only would a positive DNA test rewrite Archie's lineage, but it would also call into question the legitimacy of his place in the royal family. Lauer, emboldened by the media frenzy, began making appearances on American talk shows, discussing his relationship with Meghan in detail. He spoke of dinners in private rooms, secret rendezvous at luxury hotels, and whispered promises made away from the prying eyes of the paparazzi. His demeanor was calm, almost smug, as if he held the world's biggest secret in his hands. Meghan's team, desperate to quash the narrative, issued statement after statement denying the allegations, branding Lauer as delusional and manipulative. But the more they pushed back, the more Lauer seemed to dig in, confident in his assertions. For Prince Harry, the ordeal was nothing short of a nightmare. His friends described him as increasingly withdrawn, his once jovial nature replaced with suspicion and guardedness. He had always prided himself on his instinct, his ability to read people, but now, doubt crept in like a dark shadow. He questioned everything: Meghan's trips, her meetings, the late-night phone calls that she claimed were business-related. Had he been deceived? Was there truth to Lauer's claims? Or was this simply a ploy to claw his way back into relevance? To many, Lauer's accusations seemed desperate, a final grasp for attention from a man whose reputation had been left in tatters. But to others, the story had legs. How else could one explain his confidence? His willingness to go public with such damning allegations without fear of reprisal? His legal team, known for their aggressive litigation style, pushed forward with demands for transparency, filing motions that would force Meghan to either submit Archie to a DNA test or face public scrutiny for her refusal. British tabloids, always hungry for royal drama, ran wild with the story. They dug deep into Meghan's past, scrutinizing her relationships before Harry, dissecting her time in Hollywood, and piecing together a timeline that stretched back to her days as a struggling actress. Friends and former acquaintances were tracked down, interviewed, their statements plastered across front pages. Some defended Meghan vehemently, calling Lauer's claims outlandish and cruel. Others, however, hinted that Meghan had always been strategic, calculated even. One former colleague from the set of Suits described her as incredibly ambitious, always planning 3 steps ahead. The implication was clear: if Meghan had something to hide, she would know how to do it well. The royal family, meanwhile, remained characteristically silent. Buckingham Palace issued a short statement expressing confidence in Harry and Meghan's relationship and condemning the spread of baseless allegations. But behind the grandeur of the palace walls, whispers of concern grew louder. Senior advisors reportedly convened in private meetings to discuss damage control, their faces grim as the scope of the scandal became clear. If Lauer's claims were proven true, it would mean not just the destruction of Harry and Meghan's public image, but a monumental crisis of legitimacy for the royal family. The pressure mounted steadily, with Meghan's public appearances scrutinized more intensely than ever. Every gesture, every smile was dissected by the media, analyzed for signs of deception or distress. Public events became battlegrounds for perception, with Meghan donning designer dresses and diamond earrings, her posture perfect and her smile unyielding. To her critics, it was the performance of a lifetime, an attempt to project grace and control amidst chaos. To her supporters, it was a testament to her resilience in the face of unfounded accusations. Yet, despite her composure, the rumors continued to swirl. Lauer, undeterred by the palace's attempts at suppression, doubled down on his claims, teasing that there was more to come, more evidence, more testimonies that would prove his story true. He hinted at photographs, letters, even witnesses who had seen Meghan and him together during the alleged time of conception. It was a narrative that refused to die, feeding off the relentless churn of media speculation and public fascination. And so, the stage was set. The demand for a DNA test hung heavy in the air, a ticking time bomb that threatened to unravel everything Harry and Meghan had built in their sanctuary across the ocean. But the question remained, would they comply? Or would the secrets of Archie's parentage remain locked behind the walls of Montecito, hidden from the world, protected by silence? The sun hung low over Montecito, casting long, slanting shadows across the manicured lawns of the estate that Meghan Markle and Prince Harry now called home. But inside the pristine walls of their mansion, the atmosphere was far from serene. Meghan paced the length of the living room, her bare feet silent against the polished marble floor. Her phone rested on the glass table, the screen dark and silent. It had been that way for hours, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in her mind. The allegations had erupted like wildfire, spreading across news outlets and social media with relentless ferocity. Matt Lauer's claim that he was Archie's biological father had blindsided her, striking with the force of a wrecking ball. Meghan had always known that her life with Harry would invite scrutiny, that their decision to step back from royal duties would fuel endless speculation. But this was different. This was personal. This was a dagger aimed directly at the heart of her family. Her hand shook slightly as she poured herself a glass of water, the cool liquid sloshing slightly as it hit the rim. She took a sip, her gaze drifting out the window to the gardens below, where Archie's laughter often echoed in the afternoons. He was her son, hers and Harry's. The very notion that someone like Matt Lauer would claim otherwise was both absurd and infuriating. Yet, the whispers had grown louder, fueled by tabloid speculation and Lauer's increasingly public demands for a DNA test. Meghan's mind raced back to their last public appearance, her smile steady, her hand clasped firmly in Harry's as they navigated the flashing lights and shouted questions. She had worn a pristine white dress, its simplicity a statement of elegance and control. But now, in the silence of her living room, that control felt as fragile as glass. Lauer's allegations had struck a chord, not just with the public, but within the walls of Buckingham Palace itself. Meghan knew how the royal institution worked. She had seen its machinery up close, felt its weight pressing down on her shoulders during those long, grueling days under scrutiny. Her phone buzzed abruptly, shattering the silence and snapping her from her thoughts. She glanced at the screen, Jessica Mulroney. Meghan hesitated, then answered, her voice clipped. Jessica. On the other end, Jessica's voice was soft, cautious. Meg, I just saw the news. Are you okay? Meghan forced a laugh, the sound brittle. Okay. I'm the subject of the most ridiculous rumor imaginable, and now the entire world is dissecting my life. I'm not okay. Jessica's sigh crackled through the line. I can't believe he did this. Matt Lauer? How does he even justify it? Meghan's grip on her glass tightened. He's desperate for relevance, she replied, her tone sharp. He's been out of the spotlight for years. This is his way back in. Jessica paused, her voice dropping to a whisper. Is there anything I should know? Meghan's eyes flashed with indignation. Of course not. How could you even ask that? Her voice rose, a hint of betrayal lacing her words. Jessica hurried to apologize. I'm sorry, Meg. It's just, with everything that's happened, I just wanted to make sure you're protected. Meghan's jaw clenched, her knuckles whitening against the glass. I am protected. Harry and I are solid. Archie is our son. This is just another attempt to tear us down. Jessica hesitated, her voice softening. I believe you, but you need to be ready. The media is going to be relentless. You know how they are. Meghan nodded, her gaze fixed on the window, her mind spinning with possibilities. I'm ready, she replied firmly. I have to be. They ended the call, and Meghan stared at her phone, her reflection flickering back at her from the darkened screen. A knock at the door broke her reverie, and Harry stepped inside, his expression strained, his hands tucked into his pockets. Meghan straightened, forcing a smile. Hey. Harry's eyes were clouded with something unspoken, and MEGHAN felt her stomach twist. He approached her slowly, his gaze unwavering. "We need to talk," he said quietly. MEGHAN's smile faltered, her grip tightening on the glass. "About what?" she asked, though she already knew. Harry's eyes softened, and he stepped closer, his hands reaching out to clasp hers. "About everything. The rumors. LAUER's claims." MEGHAN stiffened, her gaze flickering away. "They're nonsense, Harry. You know that." Harry's hands squeezed hers gently. "I want to believe that, MEGHAN. I do. But the media isn't letting this go. And neither is he." MEGHAN pulled her hands back, setting the glass down with a soft clink. "So what? You think there's truth to it?" she snapped, her voice rising. Harry flinched but held his ground. "I need to know, MEGHAN. I need to know for sure." His words hung in the air, heavy and unyielding. MEGHAN's eyes flashed with something darker, colder. "You don't trust me?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. Harry sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's not about trust. It's about shutting this down. For good. If we do the test, it's over. LAUER loses his narrative, and we can move on." MEGHAN shook her head, stepping back. "No, I'm not entertaining his lies. He doesn't get to dictate our lives. This is exactly what he wants." Harry's gaze hardened, his jaw setting. "And if we don't, this will never stop. It will keep growing, spreading until it's all anyone talks about." MEGHAN's hands balled into fists at her sides. "And you think giving in is the solution? You think letting him control our lives is the answer?" Harry's voice softened, his eyes pleading. "I just want it to end, MEGHAN. I just want peace." For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick and suffocating. MEGHAN's shoulders sagged, and she looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "I won't be bullied into this. Not by him. Not by the press. We've been through worse, Harry. We can get through this too." Harry stepped forward, his hands gentle as they rested on her shoulders. "I'm with you," he murmured. "I always have been. But we have to be smart. We have to be prepared." MEGHAN met his gaze, her eyes hardening with resolve. "We are prepared. This is just noise. It'll pass." Harry didn't respond, his gaze dropping to the floor. MEGHAN's expression softened, her hand reaching out to touch his cheek. "I promise you, everything is fine. This will blow over." But as she spoke the words, a flicker of doubt crossed her eyes, so fleeting it was almost imperceptible. Harry caught it, but he said nothing. He pulled her into his arms, holding her tightly as if trying to cling to the reality they had built together. But in the back of his mind, the doubts lingered, whispering of secrets yet to be uncovered, of truths hidden beneath layers of polished smiles and carefully curated appearances. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it the whispers of scandal that had already begun to seep through the palace walls. MEGHAN, still wrapped in Harry's embrace, closed her eyes and exhaled slowly, willing herself to believe the words she had spoken. But deep down, the fear remained, a gnawing, unyielding fear that this time, the rumors would not fade. This time, the truth would demand to be seen. The sun had barely crested the horizon when Prince Harry found himself pacing the length of the garden behind their Montecito mansion. The cool morning air bit at his skin, but he barely felt it. His mind was swirling, thoughts colliding with one another in a chaotic spiral that refused to relent. Matt Lauer's accusations had shaken him to his core, not because he believed them, but because of the audacity, the sheer arrogance of making such a claim in the public sphere. Harry's hands were clenched into fists at his sides, his jaw tight with barely contained frustration. He couldn't understand how someone could stoop so low, how a man who had been disgraced and exiled from public life could now attempt to claw his way back by targeting his family. It was despicable, outrageous. More than that, it was personal. Archie was his son, his flesh and blood. The idea that someone like Matt Lauer would challenge that, would demand a DNA test as if Harry's own bond with his child could be questioned, was beyond comprehension. Harry stopped abruptly, his gaze sweeping over the garden, its sprawling greenery a stark contrast to the turmoil bubbling inside him. He remembered the day Archie was born, how tiny he was, wrapped in soft blankets, his eyes squinting against the light as if the world itself were too bright. Harry had held him for hours that first night, cradling his son against his chest, whispering promises of protection and love. He had vowed that Archie would never experience the pain and loneliness that had marked his own childhood. He would shield him from the glare of the paparazzi, from the relentless scrutiny of the press. But now, here he was forced to defend his own son's existence against claims that were as vicious as they were absurd. The accusations had hit him hard. MEGHAN had been quick to brush them off, her confidence unwavering, her resolve unyielding. She had insisted that this was just another attempt to tear them down, another ploy by the media to disrupt their lives. But Harry couldn't shake the feeling of unease that crept in during the quiet moments. He wanted to believe MEGHAN entirely, to dismiss Lauer's allegations as nothing more than desperate lies. And yet, the whispers had grown louder, creeping into conversations, slipping through the cracks of their public appearances. Harry exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair as he resumed his pacing. He had spent the last week on the phone with legal advisors, trying to determine the best course of action. Some suggested issuing a strong public statement, denouncing Lauer's claims with the full force of their legal team. Others advised against it, warning that drawing more attention to the scandal would only add fuel to the fire. Harry had been torn, but his instinct, honed through years of public scrutiny, told him that silence would not be enough. Not this time. His thoughts drifted back to MEGHAN. She had been resolute in her denial, unyielding in her insistence that Lauer's claims were baseless. Harry had admired her strength, her ability to hold her head high despite the mud being flung their way. But he couldn't help but notice the tension in her shoulders, the way her smile wavered just slightly when the topic was brought up. He had seen her retreat into her study for hours at a time, emerging with tired eyes and a guarded expression. She had been distant lately, more so than usual, and Harry's concern had only grown with each passing day. The whispers weren't just in the media. They had begun to circulate among their friends, slipping into conversations like venom. Harry had fielded calls from old acquaintances, each one more cautious than the last. There had been veiled questions, inquiries masked in concern, each one laced with the same underlying suspicion. Was it true? Had MEGHAN been unfaithful? Was Archie really his son? Harry had responded with the same answer every time. Of course, he is. MEGHAN would never do that. But each time the words left his lips, a flicker of doubt danced in the back of his mind, a flicker he forced himself to ignore. He had given up everything for MEGHAN, for their family. His home, his title, his position within the royal institution. He had chosen a life of freedom over tradition, a life where they could raise their children away from the harsh glare of the British tabloids. He couldn't believe that it had all been a lie. He refused to believe it. Yet, the whispers persisted. Matt Lauer's public appearances grew more brazen, each interview dripping with insinuation and half-truths. He spoke confidently, as if the outcome were already decided. Harry had watched one of the interviews in disbelief, his fists clenching as Lauer described private moments he allegedly shared with MEGHAN, details that Harry couldn't possibly confirm or deny. The host pressed Lauer for specifics, but he had been coy, smirking as he hinted that more revelations were to come. It had made Harry's blood boil, his hands shaking with fury as he turned off the television and stormed out of the room. MEGHAN had found him later that evening, standing alone in the garden, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon. She had approached him cautiously, her voice soft as she placed a hand on his back. "Are you all right?" she had asked, her tone gentle. Harry had turned to face her, his eyes searching hers for any sign of doubt. "I just don't understand how he thinks he can get away with this," Harry had replied, his voice tight with frustration. MEGHAN's hand rested on his cheek, her eyes softening. "Because people like him don't care about the truth," she had whispered. "They only care about the attention." Harry had nodded, pulling her into his arms and holding her tightly. But the tension hadn't dissipated. It lingered between them, heavy and unspoken, casting a shadow over their conversations and turning their moments of quiet into something strained. He could see the lines of worry etched into MEGHAN's face, the way she clutched Archie just a bit tighter when the cameras were near. They had worked so hard to build a life away from the chaos of the palace, and now it felt as if it was all slipping away, torn apart by the words of a man who should have been irrelevant. The thought of losing his family, of losing the life he had fought so hard to create, was unbearable. He had sacrificed everything for MEGHAN, for their children. The idea that someone could come along and unravel it with a single accusation was maddening. Harry knew that something had to be done. Lauer's claims had to be shut down, extinguished before they grew any further. His gaze hardened as he stared out over the garden, his mind churning with resolve. He would protect his family, no matter the cost. He would silence the whispers, end the speculation, and restore the peace that had been stolen from them. And if that meant confronting Lauer head-on, then so be it. Harry would not allow the legacy of his son to be tarnished by lies and deceit. He would fight back, and he would win. The decision settled over him like armor, fortifying his resolve as he turned back toward the house. Meghan was inside, Archie likely playing in the living room with his toys. Harry's heart softened at the thought of his son, his innocent laughter, the way his eyes lit up when Harry walked into the room. That was his boy, his son, and he would protect him from anyone who dared to say otherwise. The whispers would end. The rumors would be silenced. And Matt Lauer would regret the day he ever spoke Archie's name. The call for a DNA test reverberated across media channels with the force of a tidal wave. What had begun as a murmur of speculation quickly evolved into a full-blown demand for proof, spearheaded by none other than Matt Lauer himself. His allegations, once whispered and easily dismissed as the ramblings of a desperate man, now had the weight of public curiosity behind them. Headlines screamed from every major tabloid. Matt Lauer demands proof of Archie's paternity, and royal scandal explodes. DNA test could reveal dark secret. The pressure mounted with each passing day. Social media buzzed with speculation, conspiracy theories blossoming in every corner of the internet. Some insisted that Lauer's claims were nothing more than a desperate bid for relevance, an attempt to reclaim the limelight after years in disgrace. Others, however, latched onto the story with fervor, dissecting timelines, photographs, and public appearances with the zeal of amateur detectives. The hashtag DNA test for Archie began trending on Twitter, its presence spreading like wildfire as more and more voices joined the chorus demanding answers. For Meghan, the pressure was suffocating. She had always been adept at navigating the complexities of public life, her poise unyielding even in the face of the most vicious attacks. But this was different. This was not just an attack on her character, this was an assault on her family, on her child. The notion of submitting Archie to a DNA test was unthinkable, a violation of his privacy, of his very identity. But the drumbeat grew louder, the demands more insistent. Harry stood by her side, his jaw set in a firm line of defiance. To him, the very suggestion of a test was offensive, a blatant insult to his integrity and to the sanctity of his family. He had made his position clear during a rare public appearance, his voice steady and unyielding. "Archie is my son," he had declared, his gaze unwavering as cameras flashed around him. There is no doubt. These accusations are absurd, baseless, and deeply offensive. His words had been greeted with applause, but the whispers continued to grow. Behind closed doors, Meghan and Harry found themselves faced with an impossible choice. Their legal team had been blunt in their assessment. The calls for a DNA test were not just noise. In California, paternity tests could be requested if sufficient grounds were presented. Lauer, apparently aware of this loophole, had already filed preliminary paperwork, seeking to compel the Sussexes to submit Archie's DNA for testing. His argument was simple: if the Sussexes had nothing to hide, why resist? The legal implications were staggering. If the courts deemed Lauer's claim valid enough to pursue, Meghan and Harry could be forced into a courtroom battle that would lay bare the most intimate details of their lives. Their finances, their timelines, their movements, all of it would be dissected under the harsh glare of public scrutiny. Meghan's expression had been grim during the latest legal briefing, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as the team outlined the potential fallout. "There's no chance this goes away quietly," their lead attorney had stated bluntly, his gaze flickering between Meghan and Harry. "If Lauer is serious, and he seems to be, he's going to pursue this until it reaches the courts. That means depositions, sworn statements, and potentially a court-mandated DNA test." Meghan had stiffened, her hands gripping the armrests of her chair. "That's not going to happen," she replied firmly. "He doesn't get to do this. He doesn't get to attack my family and drag my son into this mess." Harry had reached out, his hand covering hers. "We won't let it get that far," he assured her, his voice resolute. "We'll fight it, all the way." But even as he spoke the words, doubt lingered in his mind. He had seen the relentless nature of the media machine firsthand. He knew how quickly public opinion could sway, how easily the tide could turn. The idea of submitting Archie to such a process was unthinkable, but the pressure was mounting. Their legal team continued to field calls from journalists, inquiries from publications across the globe. Everyone wanted the same thing: proof. Proof that Harry was Archie's father. Proof that Meghan's denials were true. Proof that Matt Lauer's claims were nothing more than a desperate man's last attempt to remain relevant. Behind the scenes, the Sussexes prepared for battle. Meetings were held daily, strategies mapped out with military precision. Meghan and Harry's team worked tirelessly to secure their narrative, crafting statements that emphasized their unity, their strength as a family. But even as they projected confidence, the cracks were beginning to show. Meghan had been spotted leaving meetings with red-rimmed eyes, her expression tight and guarded. Harry had grown more reclusive, his appearances limited to carefully controlled environments where questions were pre-screened and the press kept at a distance. The legal filings continued to stack up. Lauer's team, aggressive and unyielding, pushed forward with requests for evidence, demanding access to travel records, private correspondence, and medical documentation. Their goal was clear: to prove that Meghan and Lauer had been together during the time of Archie's conception. It was a narrative that played out across tabloids and talk shows, each new piece of supposed evidence dissected and debated with ruthless intensity. Public pressure only grew as more voices joined the call for transparency. Talk shows aired nightly segments dissecting the timeline of Archie's birth, juxtaposing Meghan's public appearances with Lauer's supposed sightings. Experts weighed in, some calling Lauer's claims preposterous, others insisting that there was enough ambiguity to warrant a deeper look. It was a media circus, and Meghan and Harry found themselves trapped at the center of it. In response, Meghan and Harry's legal team prepared their counteroffensive. Cease and desist letters were issued to publications that printed Lauer's allegations without verification. Their attorneys filed motions to block any attempt at a forced DNA test, citing privacy concerns and a lack of substantial evidence. But the whispers continued. Lauer, undeterred, appeared on talk shows, his face calm, his voice steady as he reiterated his claims. He hinted at more revelations to come, promising that the truth would soon be exposed. The pressure reached its peak when a well-known British tabloid announced an exclusive interview with Lauer, promising explosive revelations about his alleged relationship with Meghan. The teaser alone sent shockwaves through the media, sparking debates and reigniting public scrutiny. For Meghan and Harry, it was a tipping point. Something had to be done. A decision had to be made. One evening, as the sun dipped low over the hills of Montecito, Meghan and Harry sat together in their study, the doors closed, the lights dimmed. Meghan's eyes were weary, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Harry sat beside her, his expression tense but resolute. "We can't let him win," Meghan whispered, her voice barely audible. Harry nodded, his gaze fixed firmly ahead. "We won't," he replied, his voice strong and sure. "We'll fight this. We'll fight it with everything we have." Their hands joined, fingers intertwining, and for a moment, the chaos of the outside world faded away. They were united, determined to protect their family, their son, and the life they had fought so hard to build. But even as they held each other, the storm continued to rage, its winds growing stronger, its force unyielding. Outside, the media waited, hungry for answers, for drama, for the truth. And as the pressure for a DNA test mounted, Meghan and Harry prepared themselves for the battle of their lives. The atmosphere inside Buckingham Palace was tense, the usual calm that shrouded its grand halls disrupted by the whispers of scandal that had slipped past its iron gates. For centuries, the walls of the palace had guarded secrets, some benign, others more sinister, but this was different. This was a direct challenge to the very fabric of royal legitimacy. The Queen, in her 90s yet as sharp as ever, sat poised at the head of the long mahogany table in the Privy Council chamber, her gaze steady, her hands folded neatly in her lap. Around her, senior advisors murmured quietly, their expressions drawn and serious. The claims had reached her weeks ago, slipping through the layers of protocol and tradition that normally shielded her from the wild speculation of the press. But Matt Lauer's allegations had not faded with time. They had grown louder, more insistent, their presence lingering like a shadow over every public appearance, every media statement. His demands for a DNA test were no longer just the ramblings of a man seeking relevance. They had become a rallying cry for those who questioned the integrity of the monarchy itself. The Queen's private secretary, Sir Edward Moorcroft, cleared his throat gently, drawing her attention. "Your Majesty, the situation is escalating," he began, his voice low and measured. "There are growing calls for transparency. The tabloids are relentless, and public confidence is beginning to waver." He placed a neatly bound dossier on the table before her, the pages brimming with media clippings, poll results, and letters from concerned citizens. The Queen's eyes moved slowly over the document, her expression inscrutable. "What do they want?" she asked finally, her voice calm but edged with authority. Moorcroft hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "They want proof, Your Majesty. Lauer is demanding a DNA test, and public sentiment seems to be shifting. There is speculation. The word hung heavy in the air, its implications unmistakable. Speculation. Doubt. The kind of whisper that, if left unchecked, could unravel generations of carefully preserved tradition. The Queen's gaze did not waver. "And what do we know of Mr. Lauer?" she asked, her voice even. Moorcroft straightened, flipping through the dossier before him. "He has been quite public, ma'am. Interviews, press releases, appearances on talk shows. He claims he has evidence, photographs, letters, witnesses who can place him with the Duchess during the time of Archie's conception." His voice dropped slightly. "He's building a narrative, one that the press is more than willing to follow." A silence stretched across the table, heavy and unyielding. The Queen's hands remained folded, her gaze fixed on the dossier before her. Finally, she spoke, her voice as steady as stone. "The line of succession is not a matter for public debate. It is fact. It is protected by history and law. If this man wishes to challenge that, he will find that we are not without resources of our own." The room fell silent, the advisors exchanging glances, each wary of speaking out of turn. Finally, Moorcroft leaned forward, his tone cautious. "Your Majesty, if I may, there is the matter of public perception. In the modern age, transparency is often demanded. If we do not address this head-on, there is a risk that the narrative spirals out of control." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "Perhaps a statement of confidence in Prince Harry and the Duchess. A show of unity. It might quell the growing concerns." The Queen regarded him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. "And if it does not?" she asked quietly. Moorcroft swallowed, his gaze dropping to the table. "Then we may need to consider other measures." The implication was clear, though no one dared to speak it aloud. A DNA test, sanctioned by the Crown itself, would either shatter the allegations or solidify them in the harsh light of truth. The Queen's fingers tapped lightly against the table, her gaze drifting to the tall windows where rain streaked down the glass in thin, silver lines. "We will not be bullied into action by tabloid gossip," she declared firmly. "But neither will we ignore a threat to the integrity of the Crown." She straightened, her hands folding once more in her lap. "Prepare a statement. I want it on my desk by this evening. We will express our full confidence in the Duke and Duchess of Sussex, and ensure that our legal advisors are prepared to defend the legitimacy of Archie Harrison should it come to that." The advisors murmured their agreement, and the meeting was adjourned. But even as the room emptied, Moorcroft lingered by the door, his expression thoughtful. He knew the Queen well enough to recognize when her calm demeanor masked something deeper, something more strategic. He approached her carefully, his voice lowered. "Your Majesty, may I ask, if this matter escalates, are you prepared to sanction a DNA test?" The Queen's gaze remained fixed on the rain outside, her expression contemplative. "That would depend entirely on the strength of Mr. Lauer's case," she replied evenly, "and on how well we can control the narrative." Her eyes flickered to Moorcroft. "But rest assured, if it comes to that, the Crown will not be caught unprepared." The words settled over the room like a chill, and Moorcroft bowed his head slightly. "Of course, Your Majesty." He took his leave, closing the grand oak doors behind him, the echo of it reverberating through the hall. The Queen remained seated, her hands still and poised, her eyes fixed on the rain-splattered windows. Outside, the world continued its relentless scrutiny, its whispers growing louder with each passing day. Back in Montecito, Harry and Meghan remained sheltered from the chaos, their estate heavily guarded, their appearances limited to controlled environments. But even in their sanctuary, the pressure was mounting. Meghan had received word of the Queen's statement of confidence, delivered through their private secretary. It was meant as a gesture of solidarity, but Meghan had recognized the underlying message. The palace was watching. The Crown was prepared. Harry, too, had sensed the shift. He had seen the way Meghan's expression tightened when she read the statement, her hands curling slightly as she placed the letter back on the desk. He approached her cautiously, his hand resting on her shoulder. "They're with us," he said quietly. Meghan's eyes met his, a flicker of uncertainty crossing her gaze. "For now," she replied softly. Harry squeezed her shoulder gently. "For always," he corrected, his voice firm. But even as he spoke the words, doubt lingered. He had grown up within those walls, had seen firsthand how loyalty could shift, how quickly favor could be withdrawn when the stability of the monarchy was threatened. He wanted to believe that the palace would stand by them, that the Queen's support was ironclad. But Matt Lauer's accusations had cut deep, and the whispers of doubt were beginning to seep through even the thickest walls of royal tradition. Outside, the rain continued to fall, its rhythmic tapping against the glass a reminder that storms, no matter how distant, always arrive in time. The sun barely crept over the horizon before the headlines began to blaze across every major news outlet. In bold, capital letters, the tabloids screamed declarations of scandal and betrayal. Matt Lauer demands DNA test for Archie Harrison. Meghan Markle's dark secret uncovered, and royal lineage in question. The truth about Archie's father. The media machine roared to life, its gears churning out stories by the hour, each one more sensational than the last. Morning talk shows seized the story with unrelenting enthusiasm, panelists debating the legitimacy of Lauer's claims with the kind of fervor reserved for political scandals and celebrity downfalls. On Good Morning America, the anchors leaned in close, their voices hushed with faint concern. If there is even the slightest possibility that Matt Lauer is telling the truth, this could shake the foundations of the British monarchy, one of them intoned gravely. Her co-anchor nodded, eyebrows raised. The public has a right to know the truth. If a DNA test clears it up, why wouldn't they just do it? Across the Atlantic, British talk shows were equally relentless. This morning featured a panel of royal experts dissecting every detail of Lauer's claim, mapping timelines of Meghan's whereabouts and speculating wildly about the alleged affair. One royal commentator, his voice dripping with skepticism, declared that if the allegations were true, it would be the biggest scandal since the abdication of King Edward VIII. His co-panelist nodded solemnly, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The monarchy survives on perception, she stated. If that perception is shattered, the consequences could be catastrophic. Social media erupted in a frenzy of speculation. Twitter buzzed with trending hashtags like #WhoIsArchie'sFather and #RoyalScandal2025. Users dissecting every public appearance of Meghan and Lauer, combing through archived footage for any hint of their supposed connection. Conspiracy theories flourished in dark corners of the internet, some claiming that Meghan had orchestrated the entire narrative to solidify her hold on the royal family, while others suggested that Lauer's claim was merely a ploy to extort money from the Sussexes. Instagram and TikTok were flooded with short clips analyzing Meghan's body language, with so-called experts pointing out the signs of deception in her public appearances. As the story spread, Meghan and Harry found themselves barricaded within their Montecito estate, their every movement scrutinized by the world. Paparazzi staked out every conceivable entrance, drones buzzed overhead, and every delivery, every visitor, was captured and splashed across front pages. Meghan's expression remained steely in the few public sightings she allowed, her jaw set in defiance as she waved politely to the cameras, her hand never leaving Harry's. But behind closed doors, the pressure mounted. Legal teams shuffled in and out of their estate with grim expressions, briefcases clutched tightly as they whispered strategies for containing the fallout. The morning that the Daily Mail published its exclusive interview with Matt Lauer, the internet nearly collapsed under the weight of traffic. Lauer sat before the camera, his expression measured and confident, his hands folded neatly on the polished table before him. The journalist across from him leaned forward, her eyes wide with anticipation. "Mr. Lauer," she began, her voice a perfect blend of curiosity and skepticism, "these are extraordinary claims. Why now? Why come forward with this story now?" Lauer's smile was slight, almost rehearsed. He leaned back in his chair, crossing his legs casually. "Because the truth matters," he replied smoothly. "For too long, the narrative has been controlled by people with power, people who think they're above accountability. I believe the world deserves to know the truth. I believe Archie deserves to know the truth." His words hung in the air, and the interviewer leaned in even further. "And you're absolutely certain that you are Archie's biological father?" she pressed, her tone dripping with disbelief. Lauer's smile did not waver. "I'm certain," he replied firmly. "And I'm willing to prove it." The segment went viral within minutes of airing, clips circulating across every social media platform, dissected frame by frame for hidden implications. Comment sections exploded with heated debate. Some supported Lauer's call for a DNA test, citing his confidence as proof that he must have something substantial to back up his claims. Others decried the entire ordeal as a desperate cry for attention from a man who had been left on the fringes of media relevance. But amidst the noise, the demand for answers grew louder. Back in Montecito, Harry watched the interview in stunned silence, his hands gripping the edge of the coffee table so tightly his knuckles turned white. Meghan sat beside him, her expression frozen in disbelief. "He's lying," she whispered finally, her voice hoarse with shock. Harry nodded slowly, his gaze fixed on the screen where Lauer's confident smile lingered. "I know he is," Harry replied, though his voice was strained, tight with barely contained fury. "But he's got the world listening." Meghan turned to him, her eyes wide with desperation. "We have to fight this, Harry. We can't let him drag us through the mud like this." "Not Archie." Her voice cracked on their son's name, and Harry reached for her hand, squeezing it tightly. "We will fight it," he promised, his eyes hardening with determination. "I won't let him take this from us." But even as Harry spoke the words, he could feel the weight of public opinion shifting. The demand for transparency had grown louder, more insistent. Talk shows ran segments dissecting Meghan and Harry's every move, pundits questioning why they wouldn't simply submit to a DNA test if they truly had nothing to hide. Experts weighed in on royal protocol, explaining that if paternity were ever in question, the monarchy would be forced to address it. The idea of Archie's legitimacy being scrutinized by the public was unthinkable, yet the whispers continued, louder and more persistent with each passing day. Polls began to surface, tracking public sentiment with brutal clarity. One major news outlet released a survey that claimed 67% of respondents believed the Sussexes should submit to a DNA test to put the matter to rest. Another poll suggested that public confidence in Meghan had dipped significantly since the allegations first surfaced. Royal commentators speculated openly about the damage the scandal could do to the monarchy, with some even suggesting that it could lead to a constitutional crisis if left unresolved. For Meghan, the pressure was suffocating. She had weathered media storms before, accusations, false reports, the relentless pursuit of the paparazzi, but this was different. This was a direct attack on her family, on her son. The idea that the world could question Archie's legitimacy, could demand proof of his place within their family, was a cruelty she had never anticipated. But the machine kept turning, churning out headlines, crafting narratives, and stoking the flames of doubt. Inside the Montecito mansion, meetings became more frequent, legal briefs piled higher, and the whisper of lawsuits floated through every conversation. Meghan's composure remained intact, her expressions calm and measured in public, but behind closed doors, the strain showed. She barely slept, her nights consumed by phone calls to lawyers and advisors, her days spent rehearsing statements that might stem the tide of gossip. The world was watching, waiting for the next development, for the next crack to appear in the facade of perfection that Meghan and Harry had so carefully constructed. And as the pressure mounted, the question on everyone's mind grew louder, more insistent, until it drowned out all else. Would they submit to a DNA test? Or would the whispers continue to grow, spreading like wildfire until nothing was left unburned? Beneath the polished exterior of Montecito's sprawling estates and the glittering facade of high society luncheons, whispers of betrayal began to circulate. Meghan's inner circle, once a fortress of loyalty and discretion, now found itself under scrutiny. Questions emerged, whispered in the halls of exclusive events and murmured over late-night dinners and private rooms. Who knew? Who had seen the cracks before they splintered wide open? The scandal surrounding Matt Lauer's explosive claims had not only ignited a firestorm of public speculation but had also triggered a wave of doubt among Meghan's closest confidants. Friendships that had once been unshakable now appeared frayed, strained under the weight of suspicion. Inside her circle, trust wavered, replaced with side glances and hushed conversations that stopped the moment Meghan entered the room. Jessica Mulroney, long regarded as one of Meghan's most steadfast allies, found herself at the center of the storm. The Canadian stylist had been by Meghan's side for years, a fixture at royal events and private gatherings alike. But as Lauer's accusations gained traction, rumors began to surface that Jessica might have known more than she had let on. The whispers were quiet at first, suggestions that Jessica had been privy to Meghan's private life, that she had been present during secret meetings, that she had heard conversations that hinted at something more. Meghan, desperate to quash the rumors, reached out to Jessica directly, her voice tense with urgency. The call had been brief, clipped. Meghan's tone was sharp, her words precise. "Tell me it's not true, Jess," she demanded, the silence stretching uncomfortably long before Jessica finally spoke. "Of course it's not true," she replied, though her voice wavered slightly. Meghan pressed further, her questions growing more pointed. "You would have told me if something was wrong, wouldn't you? You would have said something?" Jessica hesitated, just long enough for Meghan to catch it. "Of course," she repeated, her voice firmer now. I would never keep something like that from you. The call ended, but Meghan's doubts remained. She couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted, that the ironclad trust she had placed in Jessica had begun to rust under the weight of secrecy. Meghan's mind wandered back to the months leading up to Archie's birth, the late-night conversations, the private meetings that Jessica had attended. Had she known? Had she seen something and chosen to remain silent? The thought gnawed at Meghan, her mind racing with possibilities. But Jessica wasn't the only one whose loyalty came into question. Abigail Spencer, another close friend from Meghan's acting days, found herself swept up in the wave of scrutiny. Abigail had been a frequent visitor at Frogmore Cottage during Meghan's pregnancy, a confidant who had shared in the joy of Archie's arrival. But now, whispers suggested that Abigail had expressed concerns about Meghan's secret meetings that were purportedly with influential men in the industry, men who held sway over media narratives and public perception. Meghan confronted Abigail during a private lunch at a secluded cafe in Beverly Hills. Their conversation, once light and filled with shared laughter, quickly turned tense. Meghan's eyes were sharp, her posture rigid as she leaned across the table. "I need to know where your loyalties lie," she said bluntly, her voice low. Abigail's expression faltered, her hands clasping the edge of her teacup tightly. "What are you talking about?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Meghan's gaze did not waver. "I've heard things," she replied simply. "Things I need you to clarify." Abigail's eyes darted to the side, her fingers tracing patterns along the rim of her cup. "I don't know what you've heard," she replied carefully, "but I've always been honest with you." Meghan's eyes narrowed slightly. "Have you?" she asked, her tone edged with suspicion. "Because it seems like a lot of people knew things I didn't." Abigail straightened in her seat, her eyes meeting Meghan's with a flash of defiance. "If you're asking me if I knew about Matt Lauer, the answer is no," she stated firmly. "But if you're asking me if I saw things that seemed off, then yes, I did." The words hung between them, heavy and unyielding. Meghan's breath caught, her hands gripping the edge of the table. "And you didn't think to tell me?" she whispered, her voice cracking slightly. Abigail's gaze softened, her expression pained. "I didn't want to believe it," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "You seemed so happy, and I just thought I was imagining things." Meghan leaned back, her eyes glassy with tears she refused to shed. "You should have told me," she replied quietly. "You should have trusted me." The conversation ended on a strained note, and Meghan left the cafe with her thoughts swirling, her faith in those closest to her shaken. It wasn't just Jessica and Abigail, there were others, too. The whispers had grown louder, spreading through her inner circle like wildfire. Friends she had considered allies now seemed distant, their conversations clipped and guarded. Her network, once fortified with trust, now felt riddled with uncertainty. Harry, sensing her unease, approached her one evening as she sat alone in their study, her gaze fixed on the flickering flames in the fireplace. He placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice gentle. "You don't have to go through this alone," he murmured. Meghan looked up at him, her eyes rimmed with exhaustion. "I don't even know who I can trust anymore," she confessed, her voice barely above a whisper. Harry knelt beside her, his eyes locking onto hers. "You can trust me," he replied firmly. "Always." Meghan exhaled shakily, nodding as she leaned into his embrace. But even as she found comfort in his arms, the questions lingered. Had her friends known more than they had shared? Had whispers of Lauer's claims slipped through the cracks of her inner circle long before the scandal erupted? And if they had, why hadn't anyone warned her? The days that followed were marked by tense conversations and fractured friendships. Meghan's inner circle, once a symbol of solidarity, now appeared fragile, its foundation cracked under the weight of betrayal and doubt. The whispers continued, slipping through the walls of Montecito, threading their way back to London, where the royal family watched with cautious eyes. For Meghan, the truth had become a double-edged sword. One that threatened not just her reputation, but the very fabric of her relationships. And as she navigated the growing chaos, she knew that the answers she sought could bring more devastation than relief. The grandeur of Buckingham Palace stretched across the horizon, its spires piercing the London skyline with the kind of timeless elegance that symbolized centuries of royal tradition. Behind its towering walls, history had been written and rewritten, scandals whispered in the darkened corners of ballrooms, and secrets buried deep beneath layers of gilded tradition. The current scandal involving Archie Harrison and Matt Lauer's demand for a DNA test was just the latest in a long line of controversies that had threatened to shake the very foundations of the monarchy. Throughout its storied history, the British royal family had been no stranger to questions of legitimacy and lineage. In fact, the whispers of royal bloodlines being tainted by secrets stretched back centuries. Some of the most well-guarded secrets in the kingdom's history were rooted in the question of parentage and succession. Archie's situation, while shocking to modern eyes, was merely the latest chapter in a centuries-old saga of controversy. One of the earliest, and perhaps most whispered about, was the scandal surrounding King Edward IV. Rumors had persisted for years that Edward IV, who reigned from 1461 to 1483, was not the biological son of his supposed father, Richard of York. The whispers were not without merit. Records indicated that during the time of Edward's conception, Richard of York was reportedly hundreds of miles away from his wife, Cecily Neville, locked in battle far from home. Historians have long speculated that Cecily may have sought comfort in the arms of another, leading to Edward's birth and his rise to the throne under a cloud of uncertainty. The implications of this were profound. If Edward IV were indeed illegitimate, his entire bloodline, including that of the current royal family, would be called into question. Yet, the whispers were never formally acknowledged. The matter swept neatly under the thick carpets of royal tradition, hidden away from prying eyes and eager tongues. The monarchy had survived, but the whispers never quite faded. They lingered in the corridors of power, unspoken but never forgotten. Fast forward to the reign of King George V, and the whispers of illegitimacy once again found their way into royal circles. George V's second son, George VI, the father of Queen Elizabeth II, was rumored to be the product of an affair. Though largely dismissed as conspiracy, the rumors resurfaced during times of political strife, a haunting reminder that even the most revered families were not immune to speculation and scandal. The royal institution had managed to weather these storms, each time emerging with its legacy intact, but not without scars. For Meghan and Harry, the pressure mounted as historians and royal experts dredged up these past controversies, drawing parallels between centuries-old rumors and the current crisis. The demand for a DNA test on Archie, while unprecedented in its public nature, was not entirely without historical precedent. In the whispers of Edward IV and the speculations around George VI, there was a grim familiarity, a reminder that the royal family's greatest threat had often come not from outside forces, but from within its own bloodlines. Television specials began airing with increasing frequency, each one diving deeper into the history of royal bloodlines, the legitimacy of heirs, and the guarded secrets of the British crown. Documentaries flashed images of Edward IV, grainy black and white photos of George VI, and carefully curated shots of Harry and Meghan in happier times. Narrators spoke in grave tones about the implications of false lineage, about the seismic shift it could cause in the line of succession. Should Matt Lauer's claims be proven true, one commentator declared during a primetime special, it would mark the single largest scandal in royal history since the abdication of King Edward VIII. It would call into question not only Archie's place in the line of succession but also the integrity of the institution itself. His co-host nodded solemnly, her expression tight with concern. "And if it's not true?" she asked. He paused, his gaze fixed on the camera. "Then it's character assassination of the most public kind. Either way, the damage is done." Inside the palace, the atmosphere grew tense. Courtiers whispered behind closed doors, their voices hushed but urgent. Documents were reviewed, timelines scrutinized, and advisors met in shadowed corners to discuss the best course of action. For the monarchy, the idea of a public DNA test was both unthinkable and, under the circumstances, potentially unavoidable. The pressure from the public had grown louder, more insistent. The demands for transparency, for clarity, seemed to echo through the very halls of Buckingham Palace itself. Queen Elizabeth, steadfast and unyielding, convened private meetings with senior advisors. Her experience in weathering storms of public opinion had been honed over decades, and her calm resolve remained unshaken. Yet, even she could not ignore the growing calls for action. Public sentiment had shifted. Polls suggested that nearly 60% of Britons believed a DNA test would be the only way to silence the rumors for good. The institution, which had prided itself on its discretion and its distance from modern media influence, now found itself under siege. Historians were quick to remind the public that the monarchy had survived far worse. The abdication crisis of 1936, the scandal surrounding Princess Margaret's forbidden love, the tragic fallout from Princess Diana's death, all had threatened the stability of the crown that it had endured. But this time, the challenge was different. This was not a matter of love or political choice. It was a matter of blood, of legitimacy, of the very foundation upon which the monarchy rested. For Meghan and Harry, the walls of Montecito seemed to close in tighter with each passing day. Their public appearances grew fewer, their statements more measured. Meghan's inner circle, once a place of solace and solidarity, now appeared fractured, riddled with doubt and suspicion. The whispers of past royal scandals found their way into conversations, slipping between words of comfort and whispered assurances that everything would be fine. But everything was not fine. The demand for a DNA test loomed larger with each passing day, the pressure mounting as the public and the press refused to let the story die. The parallels to Edward IV to George VI were now front-page news, a grim reminder that the question of blood had always been the monarchy's most fragile thread. The crown had survived centuries of war, betrayal, and scandal, but the whispers of illegitimacy had always been its greatest vulnerability. And now, with Matt Lauer's claims reverberating across the globe, that vulnerability had been laid bare for all to see. Meghan and Harry remained defiant, their public appearances calculated, their expressions steely. But the shadow of royal history loomed over them, stretching back through the centuries to a time when bloodlines were forged not only in love and loyalty but in secrets and whispered truths. If history was any indication, the outcome would not simply be decided by truth, but by perception. And perception, as the monarchy had learned over generations, could be more powerful than any decree.